For decades, space exploration has seemed like a two-player game. The United States and the Soviet Union locked in a battle for dominance beyond Earth. But the landscape has shifted. New players have entered the race, quietly building momentum, challenging the old giants. One of the most unexpected and least talked about, India's space program. While NASA was assembling massive infrastructure to reach the moon, India's space agency, ISRO, was quietly assembling rockets from components from nations all over the world, here in Kerala. Sitting just below the magnetic equator, it was the perfect launch site. But there was a problem. This was India in the 1960s. Infrastructure was lacking, and the only building suitable for a launch base was a church. So, the scientists spoke to the local pastor and got his permission to use it. Soon, shipments of components started arriving for their first experiment. A sounding rocket from NASA, a sodium payload designed to create a glowing orange cloud in the upper atmosphere, came from France. A Soviet computer was brought in to measure and track the rocket's altitude. But the French were using metric and the Americans were using imperial. The payload didn't fit into the rocket. So, inside a church, with an explosive sodium payload in front of them, Indian scientists had to machine the parts to fit. Honestly, it's the kind of scene you'd expect to see in a BPS space video.
Hey! The hell, Brian? Why am I catching strays on this?
The site was rural, and the only available vehicle was often busy. So, sometimes they would transport rocket parts from the train station to the church by bicycle or on carts pulled by oxen. Then, on November 21st, 1963, India launched its first sounding rocket. Across multiple points of the peninsula, scientists eagerly tracked the mission, snapping photos and recording how the orange cloud shifted in the sky. Meanwhile, in the nearby villages, people simply enjoyed the strange, beautiful sunset streaked with an unfamiliar glow. This moment marked the beginning of what would eventually become the Indian Space Research Organization. The origin story of the ISRO feels almost mythical, a tale of makeshift solutions, international cooperation, and sheer determination. But in many ways, not much has changed. ISRO has spent decades weaving together technologies from the Soviets, the French, and the Americans, building space stations that are greater than the sum of their parts. They've landed on the moon, discovered water at the lunar South Pole, and reached Mars. Yet, their achievements often go unnoticed in Western circles, tucked away in the news with little fanfare. As they ramp up their human spaceflight program and start launching more missions, now is a good time to look into some of the technical achievements and failures of the Indian space program. From the beginning, the Indian space program's overarching goal was clear: build the capability to launch satellites from Indian soil using homegrown expertise. But without the massive budgets of the Cold War superpowers, they had to get creative and collaborate with both sides of the global divide. NASA pitched in with 13 sounding rockets and hands-on training for Indian engineers. They were eager to study the magnetic equator, which runs right through southern India. Meanwhile, the French licensed their Centaur rocket design. At first, India imported them, but within a few years, ISRO was building them at home. From the other side of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union provided hundreds of M100 sounding rockets that for decades would be launched every Wednesday. By 1975, the program had expanded its operations, and now the small church had expanded with offices and hangars and people. These rockets were helping India build better weather models for their subcontinent, increasing our understanding of the monsoon cycle of these latitudes. And with each successive launch, the Indian Space Organization gained valuable experience. The ISRO built systems and infrastructure to handle more and more launches. They were slowly gaining the knowledge and confidence to build and launch rockets of their own design. And so came the Rohini 75, weighing just 32 kilograms and 1.5 meters in height, something a hobbyist could easily build today. For its body, it used off-the-shelf cylindrical aluminium extrusions. For fuel, they used cordite blocks, a type of smokeless propellant originally developed to replace gunpowder, which made it relatively easy to source. The original Rohini rocket could only carry a 1 kilogram payload to an altitude of 10 kilometers. But with gradual improvements in design and propulsion, the Rohini 560 was eventually capable of lifting 90 kilograms to an altitude of 390 kilometers. These gradual improvements led to a 1977 launch that would shape the program for the next decade. A modified Rohini 560 had its meteorological payload replaced with 3 types of control systems. Sounding rockets have very primitive controls: fins to remain stable, some staging controls, and a way to release the payload. This test was going to lay down the groundwork for future, larger rockets with active control. In the first stage, they tested 2 separate ways of orienting the rocket: controlling the fins by adjusting their angle hydraulically, and a surprising control system that can direct thrust at a fraction of the weight of NASA's GO-2 method. It was a solid propellant rocket. NASA famously used solid rocket motors for the space shuttle, and it achieved thrust vectoring by moving the entire rocket nozzle with hydraulic motors. This is an extremely difficult mechanism to perfect. The hydraulic motors need to move quickly and accurately. The mechanism connecting the booster itself to the moving engine needs to resist intense vibrations and temperatures. The motors, hydraulic fluid, and everything else needed to make it work weigh a lot, reducing what little payload these small rockets could carry to the upper atmosphere. So, the IRSO adapted a method used for nuclear missiles instead, something simpler and cheaper. They used a method called Secondary Injection Thrust Vector Control, or SITVC, which directs thrust by injecting gases into the nozzle. Originally developed by NASA in the 1950s and 60s, the system was used in the Minuteman and the Polaris A3 nuclear missiles. The system stores a small volume of a secondary fuel in the form of strontium perchlorate. When injected, it could alter the flow of the escaping gas by creating a shockwave that pushes the outgoing gas towards one side. This creates complex shockwaves inside the cone, but it provides a cheaper way of controlling a rocket. A gimbaling system needs to accelerate and move the nozzles, which takes time, and the SITVC system only needs to open a pressure-fed valve. This 1977 test ended up being a success, and it gave the ISRO enough data to move onto a larger rocket, capable of much more than delivering sounding probes into the upper atmosphere. This is when the ISRO started to test and develop the Satellite Launch Vehicle, or SLV. The SLV was a 4-stage, solid-fueled rocket designed to place small satellites into low Earth orbit. The ISRO had plenty of experience using solid propellants, so naturally the SLV was designed with solid fuel. Unlike liquid-fueled rockets, solid-fueled boosters require minimal pre-launch preparation and can be stored for long periods, making them ideal for India's emerging space program. The first SLV launch attempt took place on August 10, 1979. However, the mission failed due to a control system failure caused by a defective valve in the second stage, leading to vehicle instability and loss of control. Despite this setback, ISRO conducted a second attempt on July 18, 1980, which successfully placed the Rohini 1 satellite into orbit, making India the 6th nation in history with independent launch capabilities. But this success was not long-lived. The SLV only had 4 launches, and only 2 of them were successful. So they moved on to the Augmented SLV. This was an upgraded version of the SLV introduced in the mid-80s, with the addition of 2 strap-on boosters to improve payload capacity and stability. It was designed to launch heavier satellites into low Earth orbit, but early flights encountered major setbacks. The first ASLV launched on March 24, 1987, failed due to asymmetric thrust from the strap-on boosters. A year later, the second launch also failed, after the rocket lost control during booster separation. With 2 more launches, one a partial failure and the last a success, the ISRO decided that it needed a course correction, especially as the ISRO had also invested time and effort throughout the 70s and 80s to build satellites and satellite infrastructure on the ground. One of their most ambitious uses of satellite technology was the Satellite Instructional Television Experiment. It was a bold attempt to beam educational programming directly into rural villages, helping to educate the entire nation. Partnering with NASA and using their ATS-6 satellite, The ISRO broadcasted content on agriculture, health, and literacy to over 2,400 villages across 6 Indian states. But to make that happen, India had to learn satellite communication from scratch. Engineers built a 10-meter parabolic antenna in Ahmedabad to uplink the programs to the ATS-6 satellite, which could then beam down that programming to low-cost TV sets through solar-powered receiving stations in villages with no electricity. We aren't talking about beaming Sesame Street into villages. They provided critical information on the best agricultural methods, disease prevention, nutrition, and schools with the system saw drastic increases in attendance. This happened in 1969. Arthur C. Clarke called it the greatest communications experiment in history, and it galvanized rural communities in favor of India's space program. This was nation building. With India's confidence growing, they knew that the SLV and ASLV programs were not enough to reach their goals. India wanted a rocket that would not only place satellites into low Earth orbit, but also into polar orbit. More specifically, a sun-synchronous orbit. A sun-synchronous orbit allows a satellite to pass over the same region of Earth at the same time on each pass. This means the shadows and lighting in images remain consistent from one image to the next, which is crucial for detecting changes over time. Just what India needed to monitor its crops, forests, and urban sprawl. But placing a satellite in polar orbit means launching south, not east, losing the extra push of Earth rotation. Polar orbits are also at a higher altitude at around 600 to 800 kilometers, where the ISS orbits at around 400 kilometers, meaning a heavier and more powerful rocket. So, in 1982, funding was approved to build the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, or PSLV. True to ISRO's approach, they took what worked, refined it, and made it their own. Truly. The PSLV is a 4-stage rocket, each stage powered by a different engine and fuel type. When India asked what fuel and system they wanted, they simply said yes. It starts with the first stage. The original plan was to use the same solid propellant as the SLV and ASLV, a polymer binder called PPAN. It was a similar fuel used in the solid rocket boosters of the space shuttle. PPAN had a high specific impulse and had a proven track record, but it came with drawbacks. It was hard to mix and it needed high temperatures to cure, giving the IRSO a hard time manufacturing consistent batches. On top of that, the materials used to create it were imported from the US. And as the Cold War brewed, the US started enforcing stricter export controls on space technology, worried it could be repurposed for military use. So the PSLV had to adapt. The ISRO shifted to a different binder called HTPB, or hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene. Its specific impulse is similar to the PPAN binder, but it was more practical. It cured at room temperature, it was easier to mix, and once set, it was more flexible and tough. The first stage of the PSLV uses 138,000 kilograms of HTPB and can also be fitted with up to 6 strap-on boosters, arranged in pairs that can carry an additional 12,000 kilograms each. To ignite each rocket, a smaller 300mm diameter HTPB rocket is attached to the top, which is also ignited by a smaller solid rocket. And to ensure personnel safety, the ignition only happens when a safe arm mechanism is remotely set into position. You may also notice smaller attachments that look like additional boosters too, but these are strontium perchlorate storage tanks used in the vector control injection system. Along the expansion nozzle of the rocket, you can see the 24 injection ports that can alter the flow of the gas in any direction to control pitch and yaw. This system cannot control the roll, so the PSLV also stores monomethyl hydrazine that is used in the small hypergolic reaction nozzles to control the roll of the rocket. For the record, that's 3 different fuel types in a single stage. But the show does not stop there. The second stage introduces liquid propulsion, India's first experience with the technology. Instead of delving into their own research and delaying the program, the ISRO did what they know best: learn from others. They leveraged their trust with French aerospace companies to craft a peculiar deal where no money ever exchanged hands in order to get a liquid propulsion engine. India didn't want to spend its foreign currency reserves, but it did want its engineers to get deep, hands-on experience. France, on the other hand, was eager to reduce costs on its Ariane rocket program and build closer ties with India. So, the deal looked like this. ISRO would contribute the equivalent of around 200,000 hours of engineering or scientific work, which France could use however it saw fit, along with 7,000 pressure sensors. In return, France would provide technical knowledge and the license to produce the Viking engine. The engine that emerged from that deal, when built in India, would be called the Vikas engine. It was exactly what the ISRO needed. Liquid fuel engines offer a lot more control than solid fuel ones. The Vikas engine runs on a pair of hypergolic propellants, unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. The engine itself can throttle, shut down mid-flight, and even restart, which gives engineers a lot of control over the rocket's path. It can also gimbal for pitch and yaw control, and for roll control, it uses some of its own exhaust gases. The third stage is another solid fuel motor using HTPB. Unlike the first stage, this one can steer by tilting its nozzle. This was the first time the ISRO developed a flex nozzle for a rocket motor. The fourth stage has a lightweight, liquid-fueled engine designed for fine-tuning the rocket's position and placing satellites into orbit. It uses an engine similar to the one in the second stage, but with slightly different hypergolic propellants with lower freezing points. The inaugural flight of the PSLV took place on September 20th, 1993 from the Satish Dhawan Space Center. This space center, located on the other side of the country, facing the Bay of Bengal, was built during the SLV and ASLV eras, close to the equator and surrounded by water. This location allows the PSLV to launch satellites into either equatorial or polar orbits around Earth. The mission aimed to deploy an observation satellite into orbit, but a miscalculation led to incorrect attitude corrections, causing the rocket to deviate from its intended trajectory, which finally led to a failure in the second stage separation. Despite the early setbacks throughout the 1990s and 2000s, the PSLV program became a cornerstone of ISRO's success. In its most powerful configuration, the PSLV can carry up to 1,450 kilograms to geosynchronous orbit, a modest capability compared to the Ariane 4, a similar rocket developed at a similar time that can carry twice as much. But the PSLV worked very well for the ISRO. Off the back of the PSLV, the ISRO has launched 30 satellites for its remote sensing program. Circling the planet in sun-synchronous orbit, the ISRO has a wide range of observational instruments, imaging in visible, infrared, thermal, and microwave bands. These can measure changes in ocean temperature, changes in land use for crop and urban sprawl, and depending on the use case, the ISRO can map these changes with a spatial resolution from over 1 kilometer down to under 1 meter, with revisit times as frequent as every 15 minutes. Alongside Indian-made satellites, the PSLV has served as a rideshare launch system and has also launched 365 satellites from 36 different countries, helping India build international diplomatic partnerships. As of December 2024, it has completed 61 launches, with 58 reaching their intended orbits, 2 outright failures and 1 partial failure, achieving an impressive 95% success rate. From the beginning, the ISRO's mission was never to focus on extraplanetary studies, but the huge success of the PSLV and its capabilities made the ISRO rethink this strategy. The ISRO needed a new challenge. The Chandrayaan program is India's ambitious lunar exploration initiative to expand scientific understanding of the moon and develop advanced spacefaring technologies. Chandrayaan-1 was India's very first mission to the moon, and it made a huge impact. Launched on October 22, 2008, Chandrayaan-1 carried tools made by the ISRO to map the moon's surface and study how it formed, while the UK contributed an X-ray sensor to help figure out what the moon was made of. But the biggest discovery came from NASA. Their infrared instrument, M3, found something scientists have long debated: water molecules hidden in the lunar South Pole. On its very first attempt, ISRO made it to the moon and helped kick off a new global race to the lunar South Pole. Feeling confident after that great success, the ISRO set its sights even further on Mars. In November 2013, India launched its first interplanetary mission. The spacecraft carried instruments to study Mars' surface, atmosphere, and climate. It mapped terrain, measured temperature variations, monitored atmospheric loss, and searched for methane as a potential indicator of past life. These tools provided critical insights into the planet's composition and weather patterns, improving our understanding of Martian conditions. Originally meant to only last 6 months, the orbiter kept going for over 7 years before contact was lost in 2022. All of this on a budget of just $74 million. It took India less money to send something to Mars than it took Hollywood to send Matt Damon to a fake Mars. The route the spacecraft took to Mars was a point of contention. Due to the limited power of the PSLV, the spacecraft first orbited Earth for several weeks, gradually increasing velocity through a series of 6 orbital maneuvers before escaping Earth's gravity. After a 298-day interplanetary journey, the orbiter successfully entered Martian orbit. This wasn't the originally planned launch trajectory. Almost in parallel with the PSLV, ISRO had already begun work on a more powerful rocket, the GSLV, short for Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle. While the PSLV was built for polar orbits, the GSLV was designed to carry heavier satellites into geosynchronous orbit at 35,000 kilometers. The plan for the Mars mission was to use the more powerful GSLV and take a more direct route, but that vision ran into trouble. 2 consecutive launch failures of the GSLV in 2010 shook confidence in the vehicle, just as the Mars mission was being conceived. With the launch window in 2013, the ISRO did not have enough time to fix the problems and had to fall back on the longer PSLV-driven route. The GSLV is a 3-stage rocket that uses a solid core, 4 liquid-fueled strap-on boosters, and a second stage powered by the Vickers engine, and a new cryogenic upper stage. This time, Russia agreed to provide the KVD-1 cryogenic engine. These engines had never flown, but were designed for an upper stage of the N-1 rocket. But due to concerns from the United States that this technology transfer could violate the Missile Technology Control Regime, sanctions were imposed to halt the deal. As a result, Russia delivered fully assembled KVD-1 engines, but India was barred from receiving the technical drawings and engineering know-how to produce it in India. At least India could use these KVD-1 engines in their first version of the GSLV. The GSLV Mark I made its debut in April 18, 2001, launching a communication satellite, but the Russian upper stage underperformed, and the satellite missed its target orbit. The next flight in 2003 showed progress, but technical issues returned in 2006 with a booster failure. Amid these failures, the ISRO was already working on its own cryogenic engine, the CE 7.5. They had been working on it since 1994 when the Russian deal fell through. It took them until 2008 to conduct the first fire test, and it would take another 2 years for the engine to replace its Russian counterpart in the GSLV, with the first flight in the GSLV Mark II. Sadly, in its first flight, the rocket crashed due to a fuel booster turbopump malfunction. Its second test came 4 years later, with a successful satellite deployment into geosynchronous orbit, marking a major milestone in India's cryogenic propulsion technology. But the ISRO kept pushing to create a better and heavier rocket with an indigenous cryogenic engine. The Mark II gave way to a new rocket, similar in looks but different within. The ISRO calls it the LVM3, and I really wish they would think of more fun names to read over and over and over and over again, because I'm getting so sick of reading all of these boring, abbreviated names. But compared to the GSLV Mark II, the LVM3 could carry nearly double the payload, 4 tons to geosynchronous transfer orbit and up to 10 tons to low Earth orbit. The design changed too. While the Mark II used a solid core with 4 liquid strap-on boosters, the LVM3 flipped the configuration. It starts with 2 giant solid rocket boosters. These flank a central core stage that is now liquid-fueled, powered by twin Vickers engines. That shift from a solid core to a liquid one gave the ISRO more control during flight and improved the rocket's overall flexibility. That jump in capacity came with major engine upgrades. The Mark II used the CE 7.5 cryogenic engine, a staged combustion cycle engine that, while efficient, had lower thrust. With the LVM3, ISRO transitioned to the CE20 engine, which uses a gas generator cycle. This design is simpler and more robust, sacrificing a bit of efficiency for greater reliability and ease of manufacturing. The CE20 burns liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and delivers nearly 3 times the thrust of its predecessor. This rocket made it possible for India to send even bigger payloads to the moon. Chandrayaan-2 aimed to build on its predecessor's success with an orbiter, a lander named Vikram, and a rover called Pragyan. The lander unfortunately crashed. A software glitch miscalculated its velocity and altitude during its descent. As we've all learned too well recently, it's really hard to land on the moon. The orbiter is still working, sending images of the moon, including these, where you can see the landing sites of Apollo 11 and 12. Learning from these failures, ISRO designed Chandrayaan-3 with improved landing strategies, including variable thrust engines, LiDAR, and optical hazard detection. Unlike its predecessor, Chandrayaan-3 focused solely on a lander and a rover, excluding an orbiter. Its successful soft landing made India the first country to reach the moon's south pole. The ISRO has gone from strength to strength, and their ambition is showing no signs of wavering. This year, India's crewed space program will begin its first launches, with the first Indian astronauts being launched on Indian rockets, hopefully coming in 2026, with further plans to launch their own permanently crewed space station. All this starting with some ambitious engineers transporting rocket parts with bikes, using the tools at their disposal to improve the lives of their fellow Indians. It's easy to take education for granted. Having cheap educational resources available at a young age is one of the biggest legs up in life you can have. When you look at the story of the ISRO, it's not just a story of engineering. It's a story of education, of resourcefulness, and of people using whatever tools they had to chase something bigger. That same mindset is what drives platforms like Brilliant. They believe, like the ISRO did, that access to understanding should never be limited by geography, wealth, or circumstance. Brilliant takes complex subjects to challenge your problem-solving and critical thinking skills and turns them into interactive, hands-on lessons that actually make sense. Whether you're revisiting maths you learned years ago to help teach your kids, or diving into something brand new like computer science, probability theory, or orbital mechanics, Brilliant's courses are structured to build intuition, not just memorization. You're not watching lectures or flipping through textbooks. You're solving problems, one step at a time. It's active learning, and it sticks. For me, it's become one of my most enjoyable ways to keep my brain sharp between projects. And if you're someone who likes to understand why things work the way they do, from the math behind rocket trajectories to the algorithms behind machine learning, Brilliant gives you the tools to do that. I've been looking at their circuits course recently because I finally moved out of an apartment into a house and I want to get back into building things with my hands again. I haven't touched circuit design since 3rd year of college, so that's something I want to learn, and Brilliant is the perfect place to do it. So, if you want to explore a new subject or sharpen your skills in one you already love, you can head to brilliant.org/real engineering to try it out, or click the link on screen right now. You will get a free 30-day trial and 20% off the annual premium subscription.